listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans. This is your Overwatch League daily episode for January 14th, 2018. Today I'm joined by Overwatch caster and analyst Matt Pixie Carroll to discuss last night's matches. Yesterday, we had an absolute banger with some of the biggest matches of the week. The first would be the 1-0 London Spitfire up against the Philadelphia Fusion, who upset the Houston Outlaws in 5 maps on Thursday. After their performance against Jake and the Outlaws, analysts were quickly reshuffling their rankings of the team to account for the difference in their recent performances versus their perceived performance. Thankfully, it wouldn't be long until the Fusion would face their next test as the London Spitfire among the best in the league. We kicked things off on Junkertown, a map that the Spitfire have struggled on in the past. Poco and Shadowburn had respectable performances in the first round, but it was quickly apparent that the Fusion would be unable to hang with the aggressive dives from Prophet, Birdring, and Gesture. This map didn't go to a second round as London held the Fusion to just 2 points. It was smooth sailing from there for the Spitfire as the Fusion faltered on Horizon Lunar Colony. On offense, London took point B with just over a minute to spare. That wouldn't matter as the Fusion would get full held and the Spitfire would go up 2 maps to none. From then on, the Fusion would fail to take a round on Ilios and would again get full held, but this time on Numbani. Out of the gates, the Fusion didn't really have the spark that they had against the Outlaws. Boombox, while playing well, was less dominant, Fraggy seemed to struggle as the anchor tank, and they seemed unable to deal with Prophet. What changed between their game against Houston to their game against the Spitfire? Is it simply the caliber of team that the Spitfire is?
Hi, John. Once again, thanks for having me on the show. Is it simply the caliber of the team Spitfire? Yes. Short answer is yes. That's certainly a part of it. Though to that end, I think Fusion can be pleased with this performance, despite not looking as good as they did versus Houston. For starters, yes, London is a better team than Houston right now, so Philadelphia had more to match up to. But to be more specific, the key difference was London aren't as DPS dependent as Houston. Philly's plan versus Houston was to shut the DPSs down. They had different strategies employed against London, but A, they weren't as good at executing them as they had been versus Houston, and B, they didn't have as much of an effect. Even so, their measured play was still very effective, and they picked apart London at certain opportune moments. It's hard to say, though, whether that was Philly's plan going off well, or whether that's London making mistakes. Probably a bit of column A, bit of column B.
For the second map, we went from Junkertown to Horizon Lunar Colony. From there, it looked like a tale of 2 fusions. What changed between a fairly respectable performance on Junkertown to getting absolutely annihilated on Horizon Lunar Colony?
Change from Junkertown to Horizon Lunar Colony. On Horizon, they looked like they had no plan, right? Philadelphia didn't look like they had a plan. Maybe it was a lack of execution, or maybe they had a plan and it failed and it turned out they had no backup, or maybe they had no plan at all, but it looked like they had none, which shows that prep may actually be a strength of Fusion, but a lack thereof is a death knell. They can't coast by just on talent. Not that any team can versus London, but I mean, that's always been a little bit of the case, right? When you're one of these teams coming up against one of the touted favorites of the league, right? Doesn't matter how good your talent is, it's never quite going to be that same level. So it is good that they have preparation being a strength, though. So I want to see them kind of expand on that as the season goes by.
One interesting thing to note is that in the preseason, we didn't see Prophet and Birdring on the field at the same time. Now that we have, what are your thoughts? Do you think that these guys are the best DPS duo in the league?
Birdring and Prophet, they looked all right. That feels like a really non-committal answer, I know, but they're both good players in their own right, but there seemed to be little coordination between the two, especially when either one was on Genji. It goes without saying, though, that with a little more improvement in that department, these two have the potential to be a landmark DPS pair, based purely off their skill. And that's the thing, really. Whether or not they're perfectly in sync like some other DPS duos, these guys are still good enough players on a good enough team that they can beat teams like Fusion. So that's a good thing to have. That being said, naturally Spitfire should not rely on that. They do need to increase the synergy between these two DPSs.
One thing that absolutely changed between the Philadelphia Fusion's game against the Outlaws versus the match against the Spitfire is that we saw Dayfly replace Neptuno. How did you feel about that substitution?
Well, I think it's disappointing that they didn't pick up Dayfly's old teammate DM just so they could have Carpe DM on their team. But I digress. Yeah, Dayfly back on Ardiant with his co-support Jeff seemed like impossible to kill. His positioning is great, and we saw that again today. Fusion had issues, but support deaths were not one of them. Compare with how many times Nuss died, and you've got to say Dayfly has been a good pickup for this team. And to that end, when there were times where he was getting picked off a little bit more, I don't want to say more frequently because there was no pattern to it, but if he did ever get picked off, the effect was pretty immediate. So that kind of goes to show how much of an impact I'd say this pickup has on their team. I've really got to credit Dayfly.
For the second match of the evening, we saw the NYXL take on the Houston Outlaws. The Outlaws have drawn the short end of the stick so far, as in their first 4 matches, they've played Seoul, Dallas, Philadelphia, and now New York. With Jake and the Outlaws having kept it close against their opponents in the past, they've been unable to rise to the occasion and win any of their series so far. Houston hoped to turn it around against Sabiobi and the NYXL, but it would not be easy. New York is coming off a 3-1 victory against Huck's scrappy Uprising squad on Thursday, and with the addition of Jonak, many consider NYXL's support line to be one of, if not the best, in the league. Houston came out strong on Junkertown as the all-Korean rosters continue to struggle on the map, but that would be the only map Houston would win, as NYXL would hold the Outlaws to just 1 point on Anubis. On Ilios, we were treated to another incredible hit scan showing from Pine on Widowmaker and McCree and a 2-0 victory. Finally, we went to Anubis, where the Excelsior would finish the map before holding Houston to just 1 point. At the end of the series, it was another strong outing for NYXL and another example of Houston being unable to turn talent into results. So Pixie, I want to talk to you a little bit more about NYXL's support line. A lot of people are really hyped about Jonak and Arc and how good they can be. With not seeing Jonak in the preseason and some faltering there, do you think that this has solidified them as that dominant support duo that everyone says they are?
That is hard to say. They have a lot of issues with committing ults at the right times and in the right places. Jonak cleaned up quite a bit during the series, but it's still just not there yet, right? As for why, it could be pressure. It could be that other teams are making their jobs harder than these two supports were expecting. It could be that there's a wider team issue, like maybe the ults are being misused, in general, maybe calls are being made at the wrong time. They're being told to ult at the wrong times, and you're always correct to follow your team captain's call in that situation, even if you maybe don't think it's correct. So in that case, there may be some other issues going on, or it could be miscommunication. It's really hard to say. As per usual, it is probably a combination of all of those things. But there's always going to be the underlying question, in my opinion, of whether this is a team these two supports are ever going to shine on. Today, the answer was actually yes, right? The team kind of showed up, but even so, the supports themselves actually underperformed.
So it seems to me that you're not very hot on NYXL overall, but at least in this match today, how did you feel like their overall performance was?
With regards to their performance overall, I feel like Excelsior have a bit of the same issue as Shanghai Dragons. I've kind of said this before in the show. Look, the Korean players on the top Korean teams all got snapped up, right? They belong right now to Spitfire and Dynasty. Excelsior got the rest. And much like Shanghai Dragons, the whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. You have the not quite top tier talent. They are great players, do not get me wrong, but it's not quite the top tier talent. And the team is never going to excel beyond that, in my personal opinion. That being said, those parts are still great, and today they were good enough to pull off a win. That's the most important thing to note here, so let's not at all discount that. There are obvious issues like ult usage, especially ult timings, like I mentioned on the part of the supports. Usually I would say something like if they can improve on those things, they'll be great, but in New York Excelsior's case, I don't actually know if they can fix their underlying issues. They have talent, but whether they're winning in these first weeks or not, eventually those issues are going to catch up to them.
All right. So lastly, give me your closing thoughts on this one then.
Closing thoughts? I will be the first to say I may have misjudged Excelsior. They showed real chops today, and the win is a deserved one. However, a part of me does feel like it's more that Houston lost than that New York won. I don't know that New York have much more of a ceiling above them. Certainly that is my feeling about this team. On the other side of that, Houston seemed to have a chronic underperformance issue. The season is long. There is plenty of time to fix what's going wrong, but if they don't turn things around soon, they are going to lose their title as one of NA's hopes, right? How many times do you lose to Koreans before people start saying, this is one of the NA teams that can beat Koreans? It's one of those kinds of situations, and I think this match ultimately says more about Houston than it does about New York Excelsior.
For the last match of the evening, we saw the Seoul Dynasty take on the Los Angeles Gladiators. The Gladiators put up an impressive outing against a fractured London Spitfire in the preseason, but since then have a loss to the Valiant before sweeping Shanghai 4-0. Ultimately, this one went as expected as Fleta put on a showing worthy of an MVP and continues to set himself apart as the best DPS player in the world. Seoul takes this one 4-0. It felt like Junkertown was almost a game of chess. While Seoul ended up winning this one, what LA lacked in skill, they made up for with strategy and preparation. What did you see from the Gladiators to almost be successful repelling the Dynasty on Junkertown?
Yeah, man, you could describe it as a chess game, certainly. Dynasty opened up with what I will call an anti-pirate ship, which Gladiators actually read quite well, I'll give them credit for. They didn't play straight into Seoul's hand, but unfortunately, Seoul Dynasty are still a good team. And the composition that Seoul were running wasn't so one-note that it couldn't adapt to Gladiators not playing right into their hands, right? So they were still able to cap point A with little to no trouble. That being said, look, Gladiators never let Dynasty have anything for free. You've got to give them a little bit of credit there. However, it's hard to say whether that paid off because often those sorts of plays come with a cost to the team. So in this case, Gladiators. I like that Gladiators aren't just going to let teams like Dynasty steamroll them, but I'd like to see them play a little bit more conservatively. There is a time to harass and slow things down. But every time you harass the enemy, you narrow your options for future engages. I'd rather Gladiators actually keep their options open and utilize them smartly. Because when they do that, we see how they perform, right? Their offense was top-notch. It was really decisive, and I have to compliment, by the way, the timing of their time bank defense. A lot of teams misplay time bank, in my opinion, but Gladiators have clearly put some thought into this. Unfortunately, Dynasty pulled off something pretty incredible on their own defense, which is not unheard of. These are great players, right? But it's not something that Gladiators could ever really account for, right? And I feel like it's almost unfortunate because it diminishes all the good things they did on Junkertown. In my opinion, had Dynasty not pulled off all those shots on defense, that was a 100% loss for them. If Fleta had missed even one of those headshots, Gladiators would have broken that hold and, I don't doubt, beaten Seoul's time bank distance.
One potentially surprising change that the Gladiators made is that they didn't play Surefour on Junkertown. What do you think about that?
I'm 50-50 on not using Surefour. As much as we miss Surefour's Widow and McCree on point A, especially the Widow, they've got other options, right? And I'm a big fan of Asher, especially on the Tracer. Ultimately, not running Surefour wasn't what lost Junkertown for Gladiators. It was Fleta's Widow winning it for Dynasty. Maybe Surefour would have been able to kill Fleta first, but that's too conjectural to really say much about.
Against the Fuel, we saw Fleta and Munchkin hold down the DPS for Dynasty. For this one, we saw Bunny come in for Munchkin. How do you feel like he played?
Bunny was certainly adequate, is the word I will use. And I don't mean that in a sort of derisive or derogatory way. He filled the boots fine enough. You can see that Dynasty aren't as smooth with Bunny as they are with their other DPS options, but you can also see that they put work into synergizing with him, which you have to respect. And you also have to respect that they subbed him in for a game that wasn't insignificant. Their commitment to utilizing their full roster has been tested, and today Bunny showed that the work they put into him has paid off.
Shaz and Big Goose have been two consistent bright spots on the Los Angeles Gladiators roster. They've played really well in the preseason. They played really well on Wednesday. However, in this one, they definitely didn't look like themselves. What do you see changing from their earlier matches to this one against the Dynasty?
Dynasty did their homework. That's what that is. Dynasty did their homework and identified that A, Big Goose needs to be shut down, and B, they worked out how to shut him down. Fleta was also all over Shaz all series long. Other teams will have seen Dynasty do this, and they will do the same. So Gladiators will now need to work on ways they can keep their support safe, or they are going to find themselves losing a lot of matches in the near future.
All right, Pixie, closing thoughts?
I think one thing that everyone is kind of aware of, but maybe not aware of the full scope and meaning of, is just how long and expansive Overwatch League is going to be. This week has been very telling for a lot of reasons, and we've kind of got our first glimpse at teams' abilities to adapt and improve, in this instance between preseason and now. But over the many, many weeks of Overwatch League ahead, some new things are going to be tested for all of these teams. Things that a lot of these players won't have had tested before in any of their other professional experience. Things like tournament stamina. This is going to be long. The teams that are the best in the first 3 weeks might be the worst by the end out of sheer exhaustion. It is really going to test these players in terms of their skill, in terms of their endurance. It is going to test the coaching staff and the infrastructure of these teams. Today has kind of been a microcosm of the week as a whole, where we've had a good amount of expected results, we've had a good amount of unexpected results, and we're all starting to get a little bit more of a handle on these teams and a feel for who they are and what they can do and how they play and where they might be able to improve. But it is ultimately the length of Overwatch League that is truly going to test which teams deliver on those promises of where they may or may not be able to improve. And for all we know, some teams are going to start really looking to shape up, turn things around, look good, look top 5, look like they could contest first place, and then halfway through the season just crumble from exhaustion. We are only at the beginning, and I think we'd all do well to remember that.
My thanks to Pixie for joining me for the last episode of the first week of the inaugural season. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Pixie on the mic. I've got some exciting things planned for the next few days. I'll be posting a video featuring the top 5 plays from the last week, as well as a highlight of who I and other contributors think was the MVP of the first week. So make sure to tune into that. That'll be here on YouTube only. It won't go out to the audio RSS feeds. Then, when we come back on Wednesday, I'll be joined by Overwatch League caster and analyst Hexagrams to give us a preview of Week 2. Remember, you can find the show on any of your favorite podcast outlets, including iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We are everywhere. Or you can just go ahead and listen to us on the front page of winstonslab.com. We're also on YouTube. Click on the link in the show notes to find us, or go to youtube.com/KickedTripod. And if you want to stay in touch, email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com, tweet me at OWL Daily Show, or join our Discord at discord.me/OWL Daily Show. We also have a website with links to everything there. It's overwatchleaguedaily.com. With that, the first week of the inaugural season is in the books. I'll be back on Wednesday with Hex and another episode of Overwatch League Daily.